bring to the world, because sport is a human right. This is what we need to be focused on. And this is the banner that I race under now. I also have that fox tattooed on one of my calves because it's my logo. So here's what I want to convince you of today, that the inclusion of trans athletes in competition commensurate with their legal sex or gender is the most consistent position with the International Olympic Committee and the Court of Arbitration for Sport principles of fair and equitable sport. This is not the position we think is correct. We actually think that a self-identification policy is the correct sport policy, but this is the one that we think is most consistent with past rulings on these sorts of issues, and I'm going to walk you through those. So an outline, I'm going to talk about the 2015 Duty Chan case of an intersex Indian sprinter. I'm going to talk about gender and sex verification principles after the Chan case. I'm going to explain to you how discrimination works and what prima facie discrimination means. We're going to do a little philosophical detour through what is fairness in sport. And then we're going to do way more science on the science of testosterone and performance than you ever wanted to know. The spoiler is that there is no relationship between your unaltered endogenous natural testosterone and performance, none whatsoever. And that is the big shocker. Okay, so let's talk about the Court of Arbitration for Sport, the legal side of sport. So basically, it is an arbitral body. It is located in Lausanne, Switzerland. It is independent of the International Olympic Committee, but it is created by the International Olympic Committee. It's an arm's length body. It is effectively the Supreme Court for sport. And decisions are only reviewed by the Swiss Federal Tribunal, basically if they fuck up too much. And the first time that has ever happened was with Caster Semenya. It's the first time the Swiss Federal Tribunal stepped in at all over a CAS ruling in the Caster Semenya case. That blew our minds. So a little bit about CAS. I advise sports federations from local, regional to national federations like USA cycling and triathlon and Canadian hockey, but also all the way up to international federations, including the International Olympic Committee. So in 2019, a group of trans athletes and experts were flown to these are the Court of Arbitration for Sports, the historic IOC headquarters in Lausanne, Switzerland. It is the first time ever that trans people were ever in the room with decision makers to talk about trans inclusion policy. So this is a photo of the old building where we had our day-long consultations, taken from their new super fancy headquarters. And so I'm going to show you some photos of the new headquarters, and you're going to see that they're super obsessed with the motif of the 5 rings. So they have 5 concentric overlapping staircases that if you look from the bottom up or from the top down, it's the 5 rings, right? They are obsessed with the 5 rings. And obligatory professional photo next to the Olympic flag. This is looking down to the basement. It's a fake olive tree because, of course, the classical ancient Greek Olympics, the laurel wreath was of olive branch leaves. And of course, they've got the 5 pot lights with the 5 different colors of the rings. Again, obsessed with that motif. My brand, Sport is a Human Right. I took this sweater some 7,000 miles across the globe to take this one photo, front and back, right? So little, and then they took professional athletes through the IOC headquarters and told us there was a gym. And when you take professional athletes into a space like that and you tell us there's a gym, the first question we're going to ask is, can we touch stuff? So every athlete grabs stuff related to their own sport. And so I said to one of the facilitators, can you take a photo? I'm going to go squat 225 in a dress like it's no big deal. No warm up, just throw 225 on the bar, do a squat, get up. I'm never going to be in this space again. So, have some fun. So you can be there for serious business, but it's also okay to have fun. So the Court of Arbitration for Sport jurisdiction is mutually agreed binding party arbitration, and it applies to all Olympic eligible sports. So if there is a dispute, and it is always the case of an athlete bringing a dispute against either another athlete or a sports federation. So if, for example, you've been banned from competition for whatever reason by your federation, and the internal processes of the federation did not resolve the matter, then you would appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I'm just going to call it CAS from now on. And their decision is final. They're the Supreme Court. The interesting thing is that procedurally they use Swiss law, but substantively what matters is the IOC charter, the law of the nation where the headquarters of the International Sports Federation are located. So about half of the international sports federations are located in Lausanne, Switzerland. So that's easy, it's Swiss law. The other half are in Monaco. So we're going to talk about the IAAF, the Track and Field Federation, which is now World Athletics. So they're located in Monaco, so that's going to matter. The way that the court deals with previous decisions is that they do not set precedent. So they can decide a case one way and then have substantively the same case come up a year later and just 180 it. And that's basically what happened with the Duty Chan case to the Caster Semenya case. They even had the same presiding justice in both cases, and the reasoning was directly opposite. It makes no sense. So they tried to use previous decisions as persuasive, but not binding. And I think that is a serious problem with the legal structure of the court. Okay. Let's talk about Duty Chan. She is one of many intersex women athletes. She is a sprinter, and she has what we call hyperandrogenism. This means that her body produces more than the average unaltered endogenous testosterone for women. So just higher than average. And specifically, it's higher than the limit that World Athletics had in place and the current IOC policy is of 10 nanomoles per liter. That number doesn't matter in terms of what the number is. The units don't matter unless you're a chemist or have that kind of background. Just there's a limit. And her natural unaltered testosterone was above that number. And so they gave her a choice. Either you have to chemically reduce your testosterone for no medical reason, right? It's not because you're unhealthy, only for the purposes of sport, not based on any actual evidence of a performance advantage, but just because we believe there might be, or you're banned from competition. So she said, screw that. And she took her national federation, the International Federation, to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So the question presented to the CAS panel was, are these hyperandrogenism regulations discriminatory? And so you can do this in 3 different ways. You can make this case in 3 different ways. First, you can point to your international federation's own constitution. So does the hyperandrogenism regulations violate the IAAF's own constitution? Second, does it violate the IOC charter? Or third, does it violate the country's laws in which the headquarters of the International Federation are seated? I know it's a mouthful. So here, because the IAAF is located in Monaco, that is Monegasque law. So does Monaco law outlaw this sort of discrimination? And the thing is, because it's always an athlete bringing the case against the federation, the athlete always has the initial burden of proof to show that there is prima facie discrimination. So prima facie just means at first look, without going into any of the details, is this discriminatory? And that is a very obvious yes. And even the IAAF stipulated to that fact because it's obviously prima facie discriminatory. You are excluding some women because of some natural physical characteristic, and you are not excluding others. That's just prima facie discrimination. The question is, can you then justify that discrimination? And that puts us into international human rights law and ethics. So the burden shifts after she makes her prima facie case for discrimination to the sports federation trying to have this regulation. So now the IAAF, or World Athletics, has the burden of proof. They have to do three things. First, they have to show that the regulations are in service of a worthy social goal. So for example, in the US and in many countries like Canada, we have freedom of movement, right? That is a human right. You have the freedom to move. But we override that freedom sometimes, such as prison, when we deem your ability to move as too much of a threat to society. Now, we can talk about the ethics of all this shit, but you lock up a mass murderer, you override their right to freedom of movement because you think the worthy social goal of social safety is worth having a policy like jailing certain people. Okay, so here the worthy social goal of the hyperandrogenism regulations was ostensibly fairness in sport. Okay, they cleared that bar. So your policy has to be in service of a worthy social goal. If it's not even doing that, it's not going to pass. The second thing you have to do is show that the policy is both necessary and effective at promoting that worthy social goal. So is banning or reducing natural levels of testosterone necessary and effective for promoting fairness in sport? I'm going to show you no. And then the third hurdle they have to pass is the harm caused to the discriminated group outweighed by the social benefit of discriminating against them? And I'm going to also say that no. So basically, there are three tests: worthy social goal, necessary and effective at promoting that goal, and the harm is proportionate to promoting that goal. And the testosterone policies only pass the worthy social goal one, which is the lowest possible bar. It's so low. Okay, so the importance of the burden shifting is that until very recently, like until 2017, there was almost no empirical data on the relationship between natural endogenous testosterone and performance. It was all assumed, and I'm going to walk you through all the data. So the outcome of the Duty Chand case was that the IAAF could not meet their burden, and so the hyperandrogenism regulations were withdrawn. Now, a lot of shit has happened since 2015. They kept coming back with new and new attempts, and then they kept like dialing them in based on really shady science that I'm going to tell you all about. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to prove to you that sport participation is a human right. Then I'm going to say that after the Chand decision, and in fact, after 1999, sports federations are no longer allowed to do sex verification testing. Instead, they go by your legally recognized sex or gender. I'm going to prove to you that trans women can and are legally recognized as women or female, and that these testosterone policies are discrimination based on natural physical trait, that female eligibility rules such as this testosterone policy are not necessary, effective, or proportionate. And the conclusion is that there should be no endogenous testosterone limit on women. Basically, we need to stop policing femininity, period. We do not do this for men, only for women, and we need to stop. Okay. So first big thing to do, prove that sport is a human right, which is my brand and my logo. And the way that we do that is we turn to the IOC Charter. The IOC Charter has 7 fundamental principles of Olympism. There's a few sort of preamble-y ones, and then the fourth one is where the meat starts coming. And the first sentence of the fourth principle is the practice of sport is a human right. Okay, I've proved my point. Every individual must have the possibility of practicing sport without discrimination of any kind and in the Olympic spirit, which requires mutual understanding with a spirit of friendship, solidarity, and fair play. Unfortunately, transphobes who have an irrational fear of trans women taking over women's sport, which is the dictionary definition of transphobia, I'm going to call it what it is, focus on the fair play part only and kind of ignore the human right and no discrimination part. So this principle is crucial. This is why the IOC has policies for including trans athletes. The charter also has a non